I have discussed already this 3-2 service game in the fifth set where Alcaraz dug out of a love 40 hole. The wrinkle here is that at 15-40, Alcaraz hit a second serve up the tee called wide. Renaud Liechtenstein came down from his chair, checked the mark, overruled the call. That gave Alcaraz a first serve. He won that 15-40 point with the wonderful backhand defensive slice, and he ends up holding serve. So, did Zverev get robbed because the Hawkeye review showed the ball to be out? So if electronic line calling was being used at Roland Garros, that is double fault Alcaraz back on serve in the fifth. But Liechtenstein, he looked at the mark and he came up with a different answer. So did Zverev get robbed? Here's the thing, everybody. Hawkeye has a margin of error of 2 to 3 millimeters. Some even venture to say it's 3 to 4 millimeters. But let's be generous and say 2 to 3. I don't know if that's 1 millimeter, but it looked to me like maybe 2 millimeters. It was within the margin of error. And to me, that is really important. That's a very important piece of this because there are times when Hawkeye proves that umpires were wrong, that they looked at a mark and they were wrong. When you see calls that are, 10, 12 millimeters out and the umpire calls it in or vice versa, you know the umpire misread the mark or looked at the wrong mark. They made a mistake, and that happens. But when a call is so razor thin that the two systems can reasonably differ, there is no guarantee that Hawkeye is right and the umpire is wrong. There is no guarantee. It could be the other way around. It could be either way. It's not fair to say the umpire didn't read the mark correctly because the system of Hawkeye has that margin of error. It's just not fair. Some people said on Twitter, multiple people, and I was surprised by this, that because it was so close, you should just go with what the lines umpire said. Well, this has never been the guidance for chair umpires, nor should it be. Their job is to look at the mark and decide if there's a space or if there's not a space. If there's a space between the mark and the line, that's out. If there's no space, it's in. There is no deferring to the lines judge when there's a close call. It was close, so I'm just going to go with the lines judge. That's never been a thing. And by the way, it shouldn't be a thing because if it were a thing, players would lose their shit. Right? Could you imagine if a player is looking at a static mark that's sitting on the court right there and the umpire looks at it and was like, you know what? It's close, so I'm just going to go with the person who watched it in full speed and made an immediate call on the ball instead of looking at this static mark that is sitting here. That is archaeological evidence for where the ball landed on the court. So ultimately, the way this is going to work with the two systems of Hawkeye and mark checking, those two systems can reasonably differ. You have to choose a system and live with it. Live with the idea that for the 1 to 2 to 3 millimeter calls, you're going to get some differences. And guess what? Next year, all ATP events will have electronic line calling, even on clay. You know what's not going to fix this? I'll tell you exactly what's going to happen. There are going to be times where the electronic line calling makes a decision and the players are going to be looking at the mark and they're going to be saying, are you serious? I'm looking at the mark. I know that ball was in/out and I know that the electronic line calling is wrong. And the players aren't always reading the mark perfectly, and sometimes they're looking at it with rose-colored goggles. So I'm not saying that the player is always right in that case, but if you think that electronic line calling is going to get rid of the controversy that clay brings in regards to these close calls, you're wrong. And just wait and see 1 year from now. You'll see. There is no foolproof solution when these two systems reasonably differ on close calls. You pick a system and you live with the outcome.